After coming through the high pass, which was exceedingly difficult, we descended into Grand River Valley. The snow lay deep, and there was no sign of vegetation. One broad, white, dreary-looking plain laid before us, bounded by a lofty white mountain. The Rio Grande River lay 50 miles ahead, so we determined to get through the snow-covered plain as quickly as possible. We traveled late and camped in the middle of the plain without any shelter from the wind and no fuel at all but some wild sage, a small shrub which grew sparsely around us. At night, the thermometer stood at 17 degrees below zero. During the day, Ducatel, a young fellow in the company, had come very near freezing to death. By collecting a quantity of the sage, we made sufficient fire to cook, or rather half-cook, our supper of deer meat, 5 deer having been killed that evening by 2 of the men. Bolting down the half-cooked meat, we quickly turned into our blankets in order to keep tolerably warm and protect ourselves against the driving snow, for since leaving the States we had scarcely stretched our tents. In the night, as ill luck would have it, our poor mules, which had stood shivering in the cold with bowed backs and drooping heads, suffering from their exposed situation and half starved, being now reduced to a pint of corn twice a day and having no other resource for food, as soon as it was ascertained that they were gone in the middle of the night, we had to rise from our beds, lifting half a foot of snow with our top blankets, and strike out in pursuit of them. We overtook them several miles from camp, and taking them back, made them secure, but we rested little the remainder of the night. The next day we reached the Rio Grande del Norte. This we found frozen over, and we camped on the river bottom, which is thickly timbered with cottonwood and willow. Here my feet and those of several others were frozen, the result in part of wearing boots for which I quickly substituted moccasins with blanket wrappings, which are much warmer than socks, and which with leggings of the same material afford the best protection for the lower extremities against the severe cold. The next day we reached the Rio Grande del Norte. This we found frozen over, and we camped on the river bottom, which is thickly timbered with cottonwood and willow. Here my feet and those of several others were frozen, the result in part of wearing boots, for which I quickly substituted moccasins with blanket wrappers, which are much warmer than socks, and which, with leggings of the same material, afford the best protection for the lower extremities against the severe cold. Continuing up the river 2 or 3 days, we again entered the mountains, which soon assumed a very rugged character. Nature, in the ascent towards the Sierra Madre, presents herself with all the features prominent and strongly marked, her figures bold and colossal. Our progress became slow and laborious. Our track lay through deep mountain gorges amid towering precipices and beetling crags, and along steep proclivities where at any other season it would have been next to impossible to travel, but where now the deep snow afforded a secure foothold. In making the ascent of some of these precipitous mountain sides, now and then a mule would lose its footing and go tumbling and rolling many feet down. My saddle mule took one of these tumbles. Losing her foothold, she got her rope hitched upon a large log which lay loosely balanced on the rock, and knocking me down and jerking me, fortunately, no one was hurt. A great obstacle to our progress were the rapid, rough bottoms, but boggy streams which we had frequently to encounter in the deep and narrow ravines, where the mules would get balked 6 at a time with their packs on, Then we had to wade in up to our middle among the floating ice in the freezing water to help them out. The farther we went, the more obstacles we had to encounter. Difficulties beset us so thickly on every hand as we advanced that they threatened to thwart our expedition. The snow became deeper daily, and to advance was but adding dangers to difficulties. About 1/3 of the men were already more or less frostbitten. Every night, some of the mules would freeze to death, and every day as many more would give out from exhaustion and be left on the trail. It seemed like fighting fate to attempt to proceed, but we were bent on our courses and continued to advance. At one time, men were sent ahead to report the prospect and return, stating that grass appeared in the distance before them. They supposed that the snow was abating, but on coming up, what they saw proved to be the tops of bushes 6 feet high projecting above the snow, nor did anything appear upon which the animals could subsist. The corn we had packed along for them was already consumed. Sometimes we would attempt to move on, and the severity of the weather would force us back into camp. In one of these attempts, before we could beat our way half a mile against the tempest, our guide, old Bill Williams, was nearly frozen. He dropped down upon his mule in a stupor and was nearly senseless when we got into camp. A number of the men came in with their noses, ears, faces, fingers, and feet partly frozen, and 1 or 2 of the mules dropped down and froze to death under their packs. Poor mules, it was pitiable to see them. They would roam about all night, generally on account of their extreme weakness, following back the path of the previous day, pawing in the snow 3 or 4 feet deep for some sign of vegetation to keep them alive. They would fall down every 50 yards under their packs, and we would have to unpack them, lift them up, and that with fingers frozen and lacerated by the cold. They finally began eating the ropes and rawhide lariats with which they were tied until there were no more left in camp to tie them with. Then they ate the blankets which we tied over them at night. Then they came into camp and ate the pads and rigging off the pack saddles, and ate one another's manes and tails entirely bare, even into the flesh, and would come to us while sleeping and begin to eat the blankets off us. They would even tumble into our fires over the cooking utensils. But poor things, little relief could we afford them, for although they suffered much, we were in no better condition. Our provisions were nearly exhausted, and we were more or less frozen. Finally, on the 17th of December, after frequent ineffectual attempts, we found we could force our way no further. By our utmost endeavors with mauls and spades, we could make but half a mile or mile per day. The cold became more severe and storms constant, so that nothing was visible at times through the thick driving snow. For days in succession, we would labor to beat a trail a few hundred yards in length, but the next day the storm would leave no trace of the previous day's work. We were on the St. John Mountain, a section of the Sierra Madre and the main range of the Rocky Mountains proper, at an elevation of 11,000 feet. The cold was so intense and the atmosphere so rare that respiration became difficult. The least exertion became laborious and fatiguing, and would sometimes cause the blood to start from lips and nose. The mercury in the thermometer stood 20 degrees below zero, and the snow was here from 4 to 30 feet deep. When we built our campfires, deep pits were formed by the melting of the snow, completely concealing the different messes from each other. Down in these holes we slept, spreading out our blankets upon the snow, every morning crawling out from under a deep covering of snow which had fallen upon us during the night. The strong pine smoke, for here there was no timber but pine, together with the reflection of the snow, so affected our sight that at times we could scarcely see. The snow drifted over us continually, driven about by the violence of the chill blast which swept over the mountain. Besides ourselves and our mules, no vestige of animal life appeared here in this lofty and dreary solitude. Not even the ravens uttered their hoarse cry, nor the wolves their hollow and dismal howl. Finally, nearly the entire band of our 100 mules had frozen to death. After remaining in this condition for 5 days without being able to move camp, the colonel, Fremont, determined to return as quickly as possible by a different course to the Rio Grande. There we had left game upon which we could subsist until a party to be previously dispatched should return with relief. So on the 22nd of December, we commenced our move, crossing over the bleak mountain strewn with the frozen mules and packing our baggage with us. We were more than a week moving our camp and equipage over the top of this mountain and a distance of 2 miles from our first camp, the day we began to move, our provisions having been all consumed except a small portion of macaroni and sugar reserved against hard times. We commenced to eat the carcasses of the frozen mules. It was hoped we might save the few that yet lived, but this proving impossible, we began to kill and eat the surviving ones. On Christmas Day, the colonel dispatched a party of 4 men, King, Crosfelt, Breckenridge, and Bill Williams, to proceed down the Rio del Norte with all possible speed to Albuquerque, where they were to procure provisions and mules to relieve us. We allowed them 16 days to go and return. We made our Christmas and New Year's dinner on mule meat, not the fattest as may be judged, and continued to feed upon it while it was within reach.